Hello everyone, this is Mike History 2, and welcome to part 2 of Albtraum der Republikaner. Again, sorry for the German, which is Nightmare of the Republicans in English, and this is the second part of an alternate history that I am doing with Julius Caesar, and it's about what if the United States had become a monarchy in 1786. So just for a brief intro, there was a thing called the Prussian Scheme in 1786, where the United States offered a prince of Prussia, Prince Henry, its throne, and he would become the first monarch. But of course, this never happened. But in this scenario, this does happen, and so we see the consequences of that. So, in part 1, which is on Julius Caesar's channel, we talk about basically everything that goes on until 1815, in other words, the end of the Napoleonic War. So if you want to know how the US does there, then please go check that out. And so now this is part 2, and I'm picking up where he left off. So I'm assuming at this point you've watched that video, and I really hope you did, otherwise you will not understand what's going on. All right. So we start off in 1824, and the Second American Constitution is signed, which enshrines Native American chieftains and the former founding fathers as the first aristocrats of this new American monarchy. And Americans march into native holdings in order to aid the various tribes. Now, slowly over time, the American nation enters into a pacifist build-up, establishing a firm aristocracy out of the aforementioned founding fathers and Native American tribes, and American settlers begin marching into the Louisiana territory by this time, and Texas, and to a lesser extent Florida. And many of them start building military outposts, which soon turn into towns and later cities. And so as part of this scheme, the Federation of Lakota is established as a puppet state of the United States, with Omaha being its capital, with this being basically like a vassal state ruled by a Native American chief, but who ultimately owes allegiance to the United States. And so this continues and keeps going on. And then eventually, in 1843, King Augustus Ferdinand I dies, and he has no children. And in fact, this is what did actually happen in reality. Of course, Augustus Ferdinand wasn't actually a king, but in this scenario, he is. And so what happens is that the United States is temporarily taken over by James K. Polk, who is an American general and supporter of slavery. And for those of you who know American history, he was in fact a real president. However, in this timeline, he basically stages a coup d'etat, declares the Second American Republic, and he does not want a future emperor from taking power. So just like in the real timeline, James K. Polk is a quite aggressive and expansionist man. And so in 1844, the U.S. actually invades its vassal, the Federation of Lakota, causing massive atrocities in its wake and generally killing a huge amount of the population. And this horrifies most foreign nations. Now also, he is much more aggressive towards the United Kingdom. And so in 1846, 1 year after this invasion of Lakota, he decides to invade the United Kingdom over their border dispute in Columbia, which is now modern-day British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. And he wants to take the entire part because, in fact, this was co-owned by both the UK and the US, but he didn't like it, and so invades the colony of British Columbia. So because of its close proximity and larger manpower, the United States wins this war. However, because of the strength of the British Navy, it's nevertheless not a complete victory. However, in 1850, Frederick I, who is a relative of Augustus Ferdinand I, rises to the throne, removes James K. Polk, and once again restores the American monarchy under the House of Hohenzollern. And because after 7 years of Polk's tyranny, he was seen as the only alternative left for the Americans. So in 1855, negotiations finally finalized with the United Kingdom, and they decide to basically split it the way they did in real life, with British Columbia staying British and the rest of Columbia becoming the states of Oregon and Washington. And so apologize for the atrocities committed by the Second American Republic. Now, they also recreate the Lakota Federation, along with establishing 2 other autonomous zones for the natives, the Pueblo and West Frontier Federations. And also, because of the large German immigration that starts around this time, there is a stronger German presence, and of course with a German king, this helps this quite a bit. Now, eventually in 1861, the various federations realize that their time of independence is limited, and they decide to just submit to the rule of the Kingdom of America and essentially get annexed. Now, however, in 1862, something happens down south, south of the Kingdom of America, down Mexico, that will actually transform not just the United States, but many other countries in ways that they probably wouldn't have predicted. So just like in our real timeline, in 1862, France invades Mexico over essentially unpaid debts. However, in this timeline, without the Civil War, the Kingdom of America declares war on France, partly because of the Monroe Doctrine, so not wanting European powers intervening, and partly to keep French influence out, especially because they're still kind of bitter at the French for the Napoleonic Wars and all that, and to stop their influence. Now, remember that America has a Prussian king, and so he asks his relatives in Prussia to help him in the war, and as we know, Prussia and France by this time didn't get along anyways, even in the real timeline. And so what happens is that Prussia decides to invade France and take Alsace-Lorraine. However, because of the issue of slavery, which in fact, just like in the real timeline, had been boiling over a lot, this move is very unpopular in the South, and so this is what sparks the American Civil War in this timeline. And so the South of the U.S. refuses to participate in this war against France. In fact, declares independence from the United States, forms the Confederate States, and then allies with France against the United States. And so this results in basically a triple alliance between Mexico, United States, and Prussia against the Confederate States and France. And so this is known as the Third Liberation War, at least in the Kingdom of America. And essentially it's seen as basically just a continuation of the liberation wars against France. However, the British decide to give America a favor and do not interfere in the War of Liberation. So how does this war go? Well, France not only having to fight Mexico, but also having to fight Prussia, and to a lesser extent the United States, is obviously in a very bad situation. And so what happens is that they lose more badly to Prussia. Paris is taken basically within a year, so by 1863. And so France, realizing that the war is kind of hopeless in Europe, sends most of its troops to help the Confederate States and to take over more of Mexico. And so unlike what actually happened in the real timeline, in this timeline, the French and the Confederates link up at the border and so are able to have a safe and secure passageway. And so because of this, France almost takes all of Mexico. And with French help, the Confederates are able to resist the Americans for a much longer time. Nevertheless, by 1870, the Americans and French just can't fight anymore. France was slowly moving out of Mexico, and the Confederates were being pushed back. And eventually in 1870, the Third Liberation War ends, and the Prussians, Americans, and Mexicans, to some extent, are victorious. So, this obviously increases the relation between Prussia and the Kingdom of America, and also, with the Prussian king and the American king both being against slavery anyways, they use the opportunity to end slavery in the United States, and France is defeated. And so what this results is that Germany takes over Alsace-Lorraine, but this time all of Lorraine, because in real life they didn't actually take over the entire part. But in this scenario, they take over all of Alsace and all of Lorraine. Mexico regains its independence, and the Kingdom of America once again reunites. And so King Alexander I of America declares himself as America's first true emperor or Kaiser, and Wilhelm I of Germany also does the same thing, and they are both crowned as Kaisers in Versailles. And so this is where my part of the scenario ends. If you want to know what happens after this, please go check out part 3 on his channel, and that will be out on Wednesday. So definitely don't forget to check that out. It's going to be exciting. Otherwise, if you are new here, don't forget to just like, subscribe, and share. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to my friend Julius Caesar. So anyways, guys, I hope you enjoy this and have a nice day.